Hi everyone, my name is Professor April Beisinger. I am the Associate Professor of Theater Studies and Theatrical Design at St. Norbert College, which is a small liberal arts college outside of Green Bay, Wisconsin. I am Dr. Lisa Beisinger's older sister, and when she put together the waste class, the food waste class that she is teaching, she asked me to do a segment about fashion waste, about textile waste and clothing waste. Um, I, of course, jumped at the chance. This has been a particular interest of mine for quite a few years. It all started back whenever I decided to teach history of clothing and fashion. And I wanted to make sure to add a piece about the modern fashion industry to this class. What I discovered blew my mind about how awful and wasteful and kind of terrible the modern fast fashion industry is. I also joined forces with two of my colleagues in the art discipline, and that was Katie Reese and Shan Bryant Hansen. And the three of us put together a semester long project that looked at fast fashion called Fashion This. And it was exhibits and a great swap pile, a clothing swap pile, which was amazing. And we had talks and we had um, displays, and it was really wonderful to sort of bring this problem to our students to see what they thought about it. And we re-envisioned the Fashion This project into another project called Refashion This past semester, where we did an honors tutorial with our honors students, and in we use that as sort of a guinea pig for teaching a semester long team taught class in the future. I think we totally are going to do that because this problem has not gotten any better. People are more aware of it, which is nice, but it's slowly but surely sort of turning in on itself. Um, so, what I'm going to talk to you about today is a little bit about how fashion is wasteful. And it's always about the carrot and the stick, right? So whenever I teach this in class, I make sure to do the bummer stuff, like the horrible things, but also add in a segment about what we can do to help the problem. So I made sure to add that at the end for you. This is part of a talk I gave for, we have this event on campus called S&C Day, where we invite the college, the community outside of the college to come on campus. And I gave this talk to them. Um, I've updated it a little bit. Only like two people came, which was okay. A little disheartening, but that's all right because I'll keep talking until people start listening. So I've expanded it a little bit for you specifically. So hopefully you get something out of it. I will send some sources to Dr. Lisa, and so that she can pass them on to you. Some other resources that you can also look at to get some more information for yourself. So let's go ahead and get started. So some of the facts about the fashion industry. The fashion industry is the second largest polluter in the world behind the oil industry. We're mostly looking at pollution that is on both sides of the supply chain, in the manufacture and in the disposal parts of the supply chain, and in the middle of the supply chain as well, the transportation of it. So what we're looking at here is the fashion industry pollutes the water stream by waste efflugia coming out of factories and manufacturing. And it goes directly into the water system of a lot of poorer countries that where much of our fast fashion manufacturing are. We're taking a look at places like Honduras, and South America, other South American countries, as well as Bangladesh, Indonesia, India, Vietnam, China, although China is moving away a little bit from that as well, and some of the other Southeast Asian countries. Um, and the biggest problem about this disposal of waste into the land and the water is that a lot of this chemicals that are disposed of are highly poisonous and highly carcinogenic. Um, one of the biggest problems is in leather making, making of new leather goods, which is a highly intense chemical process, and it uses cadmium and chromium. We're also looking at sort of surfactants, things that make your clothes washable. Your clothes have a little bit of antimicrobial, allows chemicals that allow your clothing to hold dye, dye stuff itself. A lot of these are attack the endocrine system. They attack hormonal systems. They attack the liver, the kidneys, and a lot of things, a lot of pieces of how we develop. So these chemicals specifically attack growing children, because it's a hormonal interrupter a lot of times. With the leather industry, with cadmium and chromium specifically attacks the liver. So you see children born with jaundice, you see people with liver failure way earlier than generally it would happen. Um, and so that is the biggest problem about this wastewater is not necessarily that they're using water, but that they are polluting water. The fashion industry accounts for 8 to 10% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions and 20% of industrial wastewater pollution. One of the biggest problems, another one of the biggest problems of water usage is our dependence on cotton. Cotton is a highly delicate fiber. It's a highly delicate plant that produces this fiber, and it is a highly water dependent plant to produce. So it is there is a lot of water used to create our cotton clothing. Um, and there's a lot of pesticides and herbicides that is sprayed on the cotton. There has been a large incidence of brain tumors in Texas cotton farmers because of the chemicals they have to spray on the crop just to make the crop last. And so what we're seeing here is, in this picture here, is environmental pollution. So it's not just water waste, pollution and water waste, but it's also just dumping of clothing and clothing waste itself, solid waste as well. 97% of clothing and 98% of footwear that's sold in America was produced overseas, compared to the 80s when 70% of clothing was made domestically. For those of you who are economists and business majors, a lot of this shift from American made to made overseas was made possible with the Pan Asian Trade Agreement and the NAFTA. So a lot of the jobs that were in America were shipped overseas where they could be produced cheaper, way cheaper, way cheaper. And then that produced this glut of clothing because it could be produced cheaper that came back, prices sank, and we became dependent on fast fashion. And I want to take a second to sort of define fast fashion. So usually in the past, what has happened is that clothing comes out in seasons. So you would have a spring summer season, and then you would have a fall winter season. If you remember when you were kids going clothing shopping in the fall. So that would be a season. So we would only see a certain amount of clothing styles come into the shops because they would run on these seasons. Now, this sort of fast fashion is you're seeing new products in the stores weekly, monthly, that what was normally a 2-season cycle or a 4-season cycle is now up to 12 different lines or 16 different lines. And there's a store up here that has hence closed called Shopco. And one of the sort of advertising displays is like, it's fast to you. So it's this sort of dependent on I have new. And this is not just for cost efficiency, this is also part of our hunt for the new. So think of, I don't know if any of you have younger younger children, teenagers, tweens, but these ideas of these boxing videos, these haul, HAUL videos, where they shop and they bring back and they just show, look what I found, look what I found. I'll probably never wear it. And they just have this glut of cheap clothing that falls apart, that doesn't last, that is out of fashion almost as soon as it becomes in fashion. So going back to this, so how much does it cost to make a denim shirt in Bangladesh versus the United States? In the United States, it costs $13.22. In Bangladesh, it costs $3.72. And you'll see like the biggest cost here is in the labor. So they can make a shirt for 22 cents a piece rather than $7 a piece in the United States. The fashion industry is really exploitative. And this is not just from the front end of the clothing stream, the manufacturers who work 16-hour days for pennies, but also into the fashion models that you have women and men who are treated poorly unless they are supermodels. But most fashion models are treated quite poorly as well. So it is exploitative across the whole spectrum, this sort of obsession with the new clothing line, the new clothing look. This is the Rana Plaza in Bangladesh. This is the sort of the new birth of the fashion revolution. Kind of came to a head at the Rana Plaza disaster. On April 24th, 2013, in Bangladesh, at the Dhaka garment factory, there was a collapse during the morning rush hour. The building's owners ignored warnings about cracks that appeared in the building's walls and foundations. And there was a structural failure, as we see in this image, that injured over 2,500 people and killed 1,134 people that they were pulling out of the wreckage. The day before, a lot of the workers and people who worked in this building pointed out structural damage that the owners of the building and the managers of the clothing factories that were in this building ignored. There was a bank and a couple other stores on the first floor, a couple of offices on the first floor that they kicked out because of the damage, or that they left because of the damage, but the factory workers were still required to be there. The factories in the building produced clothing for brands like Benetton, Prada, Gucci, Versace, Montclair, Primark, and Walmart. So it is all price points that were created in this factory. And the biggest problem, one of the biggest, and this is the thing in Bangladesh, this collapse in Bangladesh was one of many, many. There was the year before, there was a fire that killed 300 people, I believe. That it was in a lot of these countries like Indonesia, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and some of the other poorer countries in Southeast Asia, that this sort of ignoring the problem for the bottom line is kind of endemic. So we see that we can't point a finger, though. In this one, we can point a finger to the owners of the building because they directly ignored. But what about problems like wages? What about problems like safe working conditions? Well, we can yell at the Gap. We can yell at Walmart. We can yell at Target. We can yell at H&M, Zara, Forever 21. We can boycott these companies, but what happens is that these companies, they have this sort of circuitous supply chain. So even if the Gap, and I remember a bunch of years ago, I don't remember exactly what it was. I think it was the fire, that the Gap is like, that it came out that the Gap was having their clothing made there. And the Gap is like, oh, no. The factory we license to make our clothing is perfectly safe. Here is the record for it. So what happens in a lot of these companies is that you get the idea of subcontracting. That so the Gap hires this one clothing manufacturer to make X amount of million pieces of clothing. They can't do it in the time frame that is required. So they subcontract. So by the time you get to someplace like the Rana Plaza, the Dhaka garment factory, you don't know who you're building it for. There's no direct line of supply chain, so that these big companies have culpable deniability that they can say, well, we had no idea that our workers were getting paid 16 cents an hour. We had no idea that the working conditions were so unsafe. Blame them, not us. But they're the ones that are demanding, and us, the American people, the Western consumer, is demanding these very, very cheap pieces of clothing. So here's a look in 2014 what the average monthly wage for manufacturing made in Asia. So we can see the monthly wage for people in Australia is about $4,000. Bangladesh is about $100. So we're looking at 16 cents a day. We're looking at something like um, uh, or 30 cents a day. We're looking at some ridiculously low number. And they work 16-hour days, they work 12-hour days. So there's not a lot of protections there. And even if the workers, and this happened after the Rana Plaza disaster, even if the workers wanted to walk out for safer, the government of Bangladesh, a lot of these governments are complicit in these sort of shady labor practices. So right after the Rana Plaza, garment workers strike. They walked out and they disrupted, and um, the government-led police went out and they arrested people and they shot at the crowds and they shot over people's head and they tear gassed people. These people who were demanding their rights because the government sanctions these sort of we're not looking at the problem. And you'll notice that we don't get into the $1,000 a month until we get up to Taiwan. So a lot of these, like Cambodia, Myanmar, Sri Lanka. So what I want you to do right now, I want you to do a little bit of just take a moment, and I want you to look at the tag of the shirt you're wearing. So I'm going to do mine as well. My mom bought me this shirt, so I'm going to take a look and see where this shirt was made. It was made in Vietnam. So let's take a look on the list here. So the person that made this shirt made $176 a day, or $176 a month. That is a problem. So let's take a look at the other side of the supply chain. So out of the 25 billion pieces of clothing that clothing waste generated by Americans a year, 85% ends up in landfills. The average American throws away about 70 pounds of textiles a year. This number is a little off because it also includes household textiles and garment factory waste. But that's still a great number of pounds of textiles that all go into the waste. That's 2.5 billion pounds of clothing that end up in landfills. So what we're looking at is stuff like, so say you donate your clothing, right? So you take your clothing and you donate it to Goodwill. How much of that clothing ends up in the store? Well, a fraction of it, a fraction of a fraction of all the clothing that is donated to these companies end up in the store. A lot of them are rebuilt or sent off to become industrial rags, which is a great use for it. It's a second and third use. A lot of them are sent to secondhand markets overseas because they can make more money. So how that happens is that so Goodwill and St. Vincent and these other companies, what they'll do is there are other companies that are secondhand purveyors. So they will buy the secondhand clothing from these thrift stores and they would sell it into the secondhand market. So the money is sticking around, but it is not as straightforward as we like to think. The other thing to think about is that all of these clothing, all of these millions of pounds of clothing, are flooding into markets like Southeast Asia. So American clothing that we bought that was made in Southeast Asia is being sent back to Southeast Asia. It's also sent a lot of times to Africa, and it's a, I can't say it's a good thing because it's really not. We should stop having so much clothing that goes into this waste stream. The the thing that gets me about this sending clothing others. So whenever there's a Super Bowl, right? They print Super Bowl champ shirts for both teams. So what happens to the losers? What happens to the team that loses the Super Bowl? Well, we've been told the story that it goes over to Africa and it's put on poor children. So every poor child in Africa has a loser Super Bowl T-shirt, right? Well, no. A lot of it is burned or incinerated or thrown into a landfill because it's not economical to send it to Africa. Whenever it goes to Africa, it becomes part of their specific supply chain, and it takes away work from local craftsmen. So if you can buy a an old Super Bowl T-shirt for 30 cents rather than a local craftsman shirt for 50 cents, you're going to go for the one that's worth that you're spending 30 cents, especially if you have a more substantive, you're living an existence that needs all of that money for other substances. Um, so the fashion paradox, we have this paradox in fashion that is the heart of this problem. So estimates vary, but one report puts the global industry at $2.4 trillion, dollars, with more than 250 billion spent in the US alone. In 2014, the average household spent an average of $1,700 on apparel and related services. The industry employs 75 million people worldwide, mostly women. If we don't buy, they don't get paid. But we have this problem with supply chain. So we're talking about the United States is Texas specifically is the second largest producer of cotton in the world. Um, so, but we don't manufacture clothing as much in this country anymore. So what happens is we harvest the cotton in Texas and we bale it up, right? We put it on a boat. The boat goes to China. That cotton is processed, turned into thread. It is sent somewhere else to be woven into fabric and dyed, sent somewhere else to be sent to Bangladesh, the wherever, Bangladesh, Laos, Cambodia, to be made into clothing that is shipped back to China, that is shipped back to the United States, that is shipped back to Texas. So we have this insane supply chain problem that we send the stuff away to be manufactured cheaply before we buy it back, and then we send it back out again at the other end. So that is the supply chain woe. So what happens if we buy local? What happens if we pay more money for our clothing? What happens if we are more economical, if we're more cognizant of how we're spending our money? The best and worst part of this whole thing is that shopping makes us feel good. Um, we have been we have been trained from a very young age. How many of you owned a little cash register, a little toy cash register? How many of you have children that push around that baby shopping cart? We are trained from a very, very young age that shopping is a good thing, that buying stuff is a good thing. And shopping is addictive, and it has been marketed. I remember after 9/11, George W. Bush got up there and said, "Hey, if you want to help the United States, get out and shop. You have to buy things to make our economy strong." Okay, yes, but and there's a pleasure at getting a bargain. There's a pleasure at buying. I think Mom bought the shirt that was made in Vietnam for me. I think she bought it at Burlington Coat Factory for like $8, and I look great in it. So there's this addictive thing. Once we got, so we're in over in Wisconsin. We're in there's a stay-at-home order. So I'm doing okay, but I'm a little anxious. So the first thing I did when I got the stay-at-home order is I went on Amazon and I started shopping for books. I'm like, wait a minute, this is not going to solve your problem. This is going to make you feel good right now, but what is really going to solve our problem? So I understand the shopping addiction. So some of the dangers of fast fashion. Fast fashion is like fast food. It's easily consumed but not well made. Um, I have a T-shirt that I got for a play where I went to St. Francis College as an undergrad, and he used to give us commemorative T-shirts as part of being in the show. I have one from 1994 that I still wear that is solid. I bought a T-shirt for something a couple like last year I think at Target. It's already falling apart. And I mean, I wear my clothes out, but that should not be happening. We should buy clothing that is costs more but lasts longer. It's bad for us and bad for the environment, this idea of fast fashion. Garments are made quickly and cheaply as possible in sweatshops by people working 14 to 16-hour days for as little as 14 cents an hour. Um, if you have a t-shirt, if you have a shirt that has, sorry, that's my parrot. He's going to start yelling because I'm not paying attention to him. Um, if you have a shirt that has any sort of beading, children generally do that beading because they have small hands. Um, so it's not even adults that are just working. There's child labor infractions happening in these factories as well. These garments are of poor quality and are manufactured for disposability and an ingrained obsolescence. They are selling you clothing that you have to throw away. That you, even if you resist the lure of the bright and shiny, you have to throw them away because they fall apart. You wash them a dozen times and the shirt is in tatters. Some of the worst, this is a list of some of the worst companies for fast fashion. H&M has been doing better, which is awesome. So H&M has this thing outside of their shops that you toss clothing into a bin and they'll give you a voucher to buy more clothing. Okay, that doesn't solve the problem that much, but at least it's better. Zara and Forever 21 are the two worst offenders. Walmart, Target clothing, the Gap is another one that's pretty terrible. And this is not just for clothing, it's about labor practices and waste as well. But so let's go to the happy part. But we can do something about this. This is not an instantly solvable problem. This is not about changing everything. Often we are struck by these enormous problems, and we decide, well, since we can't solve them outright, we can't do anything. Why would we try? But this is a thing that if everybody does a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, and talks about this problem, that slowly but surely we can make it better. This is about changing small things, being more mindful, and being informed. So 12, 12-ish things we can do about this problem. The first one is learn how to fix your own clothing. Vogue has been wonderful. Vogue magazine has been wonderful about sustainability in clothing. This is the year of the sustainable fashion. Um, so we're starting to see a lot more people like make repairs to their clothing. So learn how to reattach buttons, redo hems, hide stains. I stain my clothing a lot. So I'm learning how to hide stains. You can't just flip it inside out. I tried. And other simple fixes. And this is, you also need to teach others, like allow others to learn this as well. One of my friends, the woman who I was doing this fast fashion tutorial with, she has two small children, and her son is going to daycare. I think he's just in daycare yet, and he had torn the hole in his jeans, so she put a patch on it. And her husband pointed out that he didn't like that because it makes him look poor. It gives a definite signal that they can't afford to buy him decent clothing. So this is always the problem with it. So if you're going to do a repair, make it look fancy so that it looks like you plan to tear that knee out of your jeans. Donate. I know I talked a little bit about donations being weird, but at least you're not throwing it away. But make sure that when you donate clothing, that it is not moldy or damp or stained or like stained with gross stuff. You want it to be something that people will want to buy. If your clothing is moldy or stained, cut it up for rags. Um, and use it for washing your windows and stuff. The other one is recycle. So these are two companies, Planet Aid and USA Again, US Again. These are two companies that are for profit, um, but that's not bad. It's not a bad thing that that somebody is going to make money off of it. At least it's not going into the waste stream. Um, and you can remake as well. So take your jeans. I'm building a big, okay, this is weird. I'm building an enormous contemplation labyrinth out of denim squares. You'll have to ask Dr. Lisa about that because she helped me cut out the squares over Christmas. Rag rogs, dog toys, stuffing for camp beds, household rags, anything like that you can make out of old clothing, especially t-shirts, because cotton is really good for stuff like that. Excuse me. Um, go onto Pinterest and you'll see a million projects to reuse your old clothing. Buy secondhand stores, secondhand clothes, so consignment stores, thrift shop, Thread Up, I love, theattic.com, eBay, Plato's Closet. You might have a Plato's Closet. I think Buffalo Exchange is another kind of vintage store that resells old clothes. Do your research. Um, this is Vivienne Westwood, who is a famous fashion designer. Her phrase: "Buy less, choose well, make it last." Spend a little instead of buying 10 t-shirts or 10 tank tops for the summer. Buy 3, but spend more on them, and they'll last longer. Um, think of it as doing basics plus. And also, you can research a capsule wardrobe. The capsule wardrobe is kind of an interesting proposition that you have sets of basics that you can mix and match, and then add accessories to. So take a look at the capsule wardrobe as well. So the next one is to be aware of the fibers you buy. Like I talked about earlier with cotton, um, you cotton is really pesticide dependent and water greedy materials that we use, and it is pretty ubiquitous. Most of our clothing is made partially with cotton, especially t-shirts and jeans. Organic cotton is a better choice. It's still really water dependent, but it uses less pesticides. You can also take a look at buying other natural fibers like bamboo, flax, which is linen, hemp, modal, silk, soy. A lot of these are better choices than cotton, and they're slowly becoming more economical. Um, all of these fibers have their own disadvantages, but most of them have a lighter impact on the environment. You can also take a look at some man-made fibers. These are usually chemical based or petroleum based, and so they don't biodegrade, but they have a longevity that cotton might not have. So it might balance out. It might balance out that buying a man-made product would be okay, especially for things like shoes and winter coats that you're going to use season after season after season. The best thing to do is your research. Um, Wash cold, hang dry, more energy efficient, and will help your clothes last longer. And they will smell great. Don't buy new leather. As I talked about earlier, the tanning process is highly dangerous for the workers. It causes cancers and organ failures, and it's really poisonous. So buy used leather. If you decide you want a leather jacket, go to places like ThreadUp or Plato's Closet and buy a used one. You're still it's you're kind of still supporting the leather industry, but it's one removed, so it is less exploitative. Also, take a look at some of the new leather products. There are some great products coming out made from eco leather. One of the ones I love is this Pinex. It's made from pineapple leaves, which is a waste product anyway. And look at that. It looks like leather, and I adore it. Um, and this is one that is really important. Don't buy products that have glitter. Generally, in cosmetics, glittery stuff is made from mica powder, and mica powder is an element that is a mineral that is mined using slave child labor in India and in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Um, so it is children are sent down under the earth to in very unsafe conditions to dig up shiny things for our faces. There are other products that you can use that are glittery, that are shiny and glinty. Use those rather than mica powder. It and the way to know is to do your research. Look for products that are marketed as ethical. You might pay more, but you won't be killing a child. Buy local, shop wisely. Buy from companies that are committed to ethical and sustainable practices. Again, you might spend a little bit more, but you're doing good. Force change with your wallet. Buy, you and your friends have purchasing power, and if you demand, manufacturers will listen. Okay, this is the hardest one, especially on college campuses, like super duper duper hard one. Um, Commemorative T-shirts. So here in Wisconsin, there is a grocery store called Festival Foods, and every Thanksgiving they do a thing called Turkey Trot. And if you do the Turkey Trot, which is a little 5K, you get a pie. Hell yeah. You also get a commemorative T-shirt that says, "I did the Turkey Trot." These commemorative T-shirts are bright orange. And so when I was putting together my first Fashion This exhibit, I was buying commemorative T-shirts as the whole project was the 1,000 T-shirt project. I used 500 T-shirts in the project because 1,000 T-shirts is a lot of damn T-shirts. But so I went to this place called Goodwill Surplus. So it's a surplus store that you buy by the pound, linked to Goodwill Industries. So many of the shirts I found were from the Turkey Trot. So if you are a member of a club, if you have purchasing power, if you have any say in this, avoid commemorative T-shirts because they'll be worn once and then tossed into the donation bag, worn once and thrown away, worn a couple times and they'll fall apart. Think of other ways to commemorate. So things like, so this year for my department, for my theater studies department, I'm buying patches. We're doing iron-on patches for the students. I think next year I'm going to do enamel pins, bandanas, hats, pins, other things like that. Mugs might be great. They might be a little more expensive, but I think it'll be worth it in the long run because we're not going to see this waste. The other thing, the last one is to be informed. Knowledge, like in all things, is your greatest weapon. Read your labels. Ask the question, who made your clothes? And look for ethical and sustainable companies. This is the best way that you can help solve this problem. Don't despair. I know it seems overwhelming from this very sad talk, but don't worry. This is something that you can help with. Um, for that, we set up for our class, our tutorial in ethical and sustainable fashion. We set up a website with a whole bunch of resources. I will send that link to Dr. Lisa so that she can send it to you, so you can kind of take a look at some of the resources that I use when putting this together. John Oliver has a great segment about fast fashion. I have things up there. We have things up there about modeling, about manufacturing. NPR did this great the travels of a T-shirt. t-shirt production that is really interesting, a Planet Money thing. So take a look at all those and see if you can find out more information. It was a pleasure talking to you. Hopefully you got a lot out of it. Don't freak out. This is something you can help with. All right, take care of yourselves. Bye.